Imagine a place that most Porsche enthusiasts have never heard of. Not Stuttgart, not Zuffenhausen, not the Porsche Museum filled with gleaming supercars. It is a small medieval town hidden among the Austrian Alps, where one of the greatest legends in automotive history was born inside an old sawmill. This is where Ferry Porsche built the first car to carry the Porsche name. This is where the first examples of the 356 were created, and from them grew the entire history of the brand. The workshop still stands in the same place today, with a wooden floor once walked by Ferdinand Porsche, Ferry Porsche, and Erwin Kommenda. Just a few minutes away is the first garage and design office, where ideas were born that would change the automotive world. Nearby, there is also an extraordinary private museum, founded by a man who, as a young boy, looked through the workshop doors and watched the first Porsches being built. Today, you can see the 8th oldest surviving Porsche in the world, original wooden forms used to shape body panels by hand, racing legends worth millions of euros, and cars you will not even find in the factory museum in Stuttgart. If there is one place every Porsche enthusiast should visit at least once in a lifetime, it is Gmünd. This is where it all began. To understand why the first Porsche was created here, we need to go back to the final years of the Second World War. In 1944, Stuttgart was regularly bombed by Allied aircraft. Factories, industrial plants, and engineering offices became easy targets, so the German authorities began relocating the most important companies to safer regions. Ferdinand Porsche's engineering office, responsible among other things for military projects and the development of the Volkswagen Beetle, also had to leave Stuttgart. They searched for a place far from the main areas of fighting, located in the mountains, away from major cities and strategic targets for Allied bombers. The choice fell on the small town of Gmünd in Carinthia. The decision was not accidental. Ferdinand Porsche knew the region extremely well, because the family owned property nearby in Zell am See, and he had used the mountain roads around the Kochberg Pass for years to test his designs. The local authorities offered an abandoned sawmill, which was quickly converted into a design office and workshops. At that moment, no one could have imagined that a place chosen purely for wartime reasons would, only a few years later, become the birthplace of one of the most recognizable automobile brands in the world. The paradox of history is that it was the war itself that led to the birth of Porsche. As the war drew to a close, the Porsche family found itself in an extremely difficult situation. Ferdinand Porsche was arrested by the French occupation authorities on charges of collaborating with the Third Reich and spent nearly 22 months in prison, although he was ultimately never convicted of any crime. The future of the entire company now rested on the shoulders of his son, Ferry Porsche. The military market had virtually disappeared overnight, and the engineering office had to find an entirely new source of income. At first, the employees designed anything that could generate revenue: winches, water turbines, pumps, agricultural machinery, tractors, and even ski lifts. But Ferry had been carrying a very different idea in his mind for a long time. Years later, he would famously say, "I couldn't find the sports car of my dreams, so I decided to build it myself." It was here in Gmünd that this vision became reality. In a small workshop surrounded by alpine peaks, work began on the first automobile that would bear the Porsche name. It was not meant to be a luxurious grand tourer or a heavy limousine. Ferry wanted to create a lightweight, agile sports car that would deliver pure driving pleasure. No one could have imagined that this modest project would become the beginning of a story spanning more than 70 years and millions of cars produced around the world. The conditions in which the first Porsche was created were a world away from the modern factories we associate with the brand today. The workshops were housed inside a former sawmill where timber had been processed only a short time before. There were no automated assembly lines, no robots, and no computers. Almost everything was done by hand using simple tools and the remarkable skills of experienced craftsmen. Materials were also in short supply. Europe was only beginning to recover from the war, so Porsche employees traveled around the surrounding region, visiting military scrapyards and salvage depots, purchasing tons of components from damaged Volkswagen Kübelwagens, Schwimmwagens, and Beetles. Those recycled parts became the foundation of the first Porsche automobiles. The Volkswagen engines, however, were extensively reworked. They received new camshafts, redesigned cylinder heads, modified crankshafts, and twin carburetors, increasing output from around 25 horsepower to approximately 40 horsepower. Weighing only about 585 kilograms, the car delivered performance that was truly impressive for its time. In July 1948, the very first Porsche 356 #1 Roadster was completed. That single car is officially regarded as the birth of the Porsche brand. Today, the original prototype resides in the Porsche Museum in Stuttgart. But everything began right here in Gmünd, in a place that looked more like a rural workshop than the birthplace of one of the world's greatest automotive legends. After the completion of the first Porsche 356 Roadster prototype, it was time to begin building a small production series for customers. During 1948 and 1949, only 52 examples of the Porsche 356 were built in Gmünd. 44 of them were closed coupes, while the remaining 8 featured open cabriolet bodywork. Every single car was built almost entirely by hand. The aluminum body panels were shaped over wooden bucks, and each individual component was carefully fitted by craftsmen. The most skilled panel beater needed as much as 90 hours to hand-form the complete body of a single automobile. Remarkably, at the Pfeifhofer Museum, you can still see both the original wooden forms used to create the first Porsche bodies, and even the hammer the craftsmen used during this painstaking process. Every car that left the workshop was slightly different from the one before it. There was no true production line. It was far closer to the construction of exclusive coach-built automobiles than to mass production. Despite the modest conditions, all 52 cars quickly found buyers. Today, these automobiles, known as the Gmünd 356, are among the most valuable Porsches in existence. Whenever one appears on the collector's market, its value is measured in many millions of euros. It was these 52 handmade cars that launched the history of a company that now produces hundreds of thousands of vehicles every year. The first Porsche did not impress with overwhelming power. Its air-cooled 4-cylinder Boxer engine, with a displacement of 1.1 liters, produced only about 40 horsepower. But the secret of the car lay somewhere else. Thanks to its lightweight construction, tipping the scales at only around 585 kilograms, combined with its exceptional balance, the Porsche handled far better than most of its contemporaries. From the very beginning, Ferry Porsche followed one simple philosophy. A sports car does not have to be the most powerful if it is light, precise, and gives the driver complete control. It was here in Gmünd that the values defining every Porsche to this day were born. Low weight, outstanding handling, a rear-mounted engine, and a direct connection between driver and machine. Interestingly, the earliest prototypes were tested on the surrounding alpine roads and mountain passes. One of the most important testing locations was the Kochberg Pass, one of the steepest roads in Europe. It was there that engineers evaluated engine durability, braking performance, and suspension behavior. So, long before Porsche began winning at Le Mans and the Monte Carlo Rally, it completed its true apprenticeship on the winding mountain roads surrounding Gmünd. Every corner, every climb, and every kilometer of those alpine roads helped shape the character of the sports cars that are still regarded today as some of the finest drivers' cars in the world. Although Gmünd became the birthplace of Porsche, it was clear from the very beginning that the small workshop would never allow the company to reach its full potential. Building 52 automobiles had taken almost 2 years, and handcrafting every single car was both extremely expensive and incredibly time-consuming. As Europe gradually returned to stability after the war, Porsche was finally able to begin planning its return to Germany. An additional boost came from an agreement with Volkswagen, under which Porsche received royalties for every Volkswagen Beetle produced. This income provided the financial foundation needed to build a new factory in Stuttgart-Zuffenhausen. In 1949, the company began transferring production back to Germany. It was there that full-scale production of the Porsche 356 started, now using steel bodies manufactured by Reuter. For Gmünd, this marked the end of an extraordinary chapter that had lasted only a few years. The workshop fell silent, and most of the town's residents probably believed that Porsche's story in Gmünd had come to an end forever. No one could have imagined that decades later, this very place would become a pilgrimage site for Porsche enthusiasts from all over the world. Ironically, although Gmünd was the true birthplace of Porsche, it remained an almost forgotten chapter of the company's history for many years, hidden away among the Alpine mountains. The story of the museum in Gmünd is every bit as remarkable as the story of Porsche itself. It all began with a little boy named Helmut Pfeifhofer. He grew up in Gmünd and attended school alongside the children of Porsche employees. One day, he heard the sound of hammers striking sheet metal coming from the old sawmill. Curious, he rode his bicycle over and carefully pushed open the heavy wooden workshop door. What he saw inside remained with him for the rest of his life. Standing inside the workshop was a row of the very first Porsche 356 cars with aluminum bodies. At the time, there were only 4 automobiles in the entire town. so these sleek sports coupes looked like spaceships from another world. Helmut would later recall that it was in that very moment that he fell hopelessly in love with Porsche. What he could never have imagined was that, several decades later, he would become the owner of the very place where he had seen his first Porsche and create a museum visited by tens of thousands of people from around the world. Sometimes a single moment is enough to change an entire life. For Helmut Pfeifhofer, all it took was one glance through the partially opened door of an old workshop. Helmut had to wait almost 20 years before owning his first Porsche. He worked as an antiques dealer, and with every passing year, his passion for the brand grew even stronger. He collected not only cars, but also old photographs, documents, tools, spare parts, posters, and anything connected with Porsche's history. Over time, his collection expanded to include dozens of exceptionally rare automobiles. Yet his greatest dream remained one of the original Gmünd 356 models. In 1976, he finally managed to purchase chassis number 020, the 8th oldest surviving Porsche in the world. Soon afterward, he decided to save not only the car, but also the original factory itself. The building had stood abandoned for years and was slowly falling into ruin. Using his own money, Helmut spent many years repairing the roof and replacing the windows to protect it from complete destruction. The turning point came during the 1980s, when his wife suggested that such an extraordinary collection deserved its own museum. The idea also appealed to the mayor of Gmünd, who sold the historic building to Pfeifhofer. Thus, in 1982, the first private Porsche museum in Europe was born. Most importantly, it was not created by a large corporation, but by one man, driven purely by passion. That is exactly why the museum has preserved such a unique atmosphere. It does not resemble modern exhibitions, filled with glass walls and digital displays. Here, history can be felt almost everywhere you look. Although the museum houses dozens of extraordinary automobiles, one of them captures the attention of absolutely every visitor. It is the Porsche 356 Gmünd, chassis number 020. This is the 8th oldest surviving Porsche in the world, and many historians consider it the most original surviving example of all the cars built in Gmünd. Unlike many others, it has never been significantly rebuilt or modernized. When Helmut Pfeifhofer bought it during the 1970s, he removed the old paint to stop the corrosion that had begun to develop. Beneath the paint, the raw aluminum body appeared, together with its darker steel doors and engine lids, exactly as he had seen it as a young boy in 1948. He immediately decided to preserve the car in that condition. As a result, visitors today can admire a Porsche that looks almost exactly as it did when it left the workshop more than 70 years ago. The interior has also been preserved in an exceptionally original state. The worn seats, scratched dashboard, and every sign of everyday use are not considered flaws. On the contrary, they tell the story of a car that truly lived. A few years ago, Christoph Pfeifhofer decided to bring this remarkable automobile back to life. Only the components absolutely necessary for safe driving were replaced, while as many original parts as possible were carefully preserved. Thanks to this approach, chassis number 020 is not only one of the oldest Porsches in existence, but also one of the very few that can still drive under its own power today. Contrary to what many people might expect, the greatest strength of the museum in Gmünd is not the number of exhibits, but their uniqueness. Inside the halls of the former factory are around 70 automobiles, many of which rank among the rarest Porsches ever built. Right beside the first aluminum Porsche 356, visitors can admire the legendary Porsche 550 Spider, along with the original wooden buck over which its body panels were hand-formed. It was this very 550 Spider that became forever linked to the tragic story of James Dean, whose fatal accident secured the car's place in automotive history. Just a few steps away stands the exceptionally rare Porsche 356 Carrera II. Nearby, you can also admire the Porsche 904 Carrera GTS, the racing 935 Baby, the Porsche 962 IMSA, the 911 Carrera RS, the 964 RSR, the Carrera GT, and the homologation special Porsche 924 Carrera GTS, one of only 59 examples ever produced, including one of just 3 hand-built prototypes. The museum also displays extraordinary utility vehicles, including the Porsche Jagdwagen Type 597, as well as the incredibly rare Type 87 Kommandorwagen, an all-wheel drive military vehicle of which only 4 were ever built. Every automobile has its own remarkable story, and many are worth considerably more than exhibits displayed in some of the world's largest automotive museums. What truly sets the Pfeifhofer Museum apart from many other collections is the fact that the cars are not treated as lifeless exhibits. Christoph Pfeifhofer, Helmut's son, is an active racing driver who regularly competes in historic Porsche events throughout Europe. Many of the cars displayed in the museum today were still racing only a few years ago, and some continue to leave their exhibition spaces from time to time. Christoph follows one simple philosophy: a car was built to be driven, not simply admired. Of course, there are exceptions. The museum's most valuable treasure, chassis number 020, rarely leaves the building. In fact, Christoph refuses to drive it if there is even the slightest chance of rain. Its raw aluminum body and irreplaceable original components are simply too valuable to expose to moisture. But whenever the engine comes to life, the entire former workshop fills with the unmistakable sound of its little boxer engine, almost exactly the same sound that echoed through this building more than 70 years ago. Few automotive experiences can compare. Standing in the very place where the car was built, you hear precisely the same engine note that Ferdinand Porsche, Ferry Porsche, and their mechanics heard during its very first test runs. That is what makes this museum so extraordinary. It is not merely an exhibition. It is a living witness to the birth of the Porsche legend. Most visitors who come to Gmünd stop only at the museum. Yet just about 2 kilometers away lies another place of enormous importance in Porsche history. It was the first workshop, engineering office, and garage where Ferdinand Porsche, Ferry Porsche, and their team worked during the war years. It was here that the first sketches of the Porsche 356, the legendary Cisitalia Tipo 360, and many other projects that would later change the automotive world were created. The original rooms have been preserved, along with Ferdinand Porsche's desk, his drafting table, and numerous artifacts from that period. Visitors can even see the list of the very first customers who ordered a Porsche 356. This place is not nearly as famous as the Porsche Museum in Stuttgart, yet many enthusiasts consider it far more authentic. Here, you are not walking through a perfectly polished exhibition created by a global corporation. Instead, you are walking across the very same wooden floors once crossed by the people who built the first Porsche automobiles. That is why visiting both locations, the museum and the original factory, provides the complete story of the brand's birth. It is difficult to find another place anywhere in the world where Porsche's history feels so tangible and so incredibly close. Gmünd itself deserves a visit even if Porsche had never arrived here. It is one of the best preserved medieval towns in Austria and was granted town privileges as early as 1346. The town developed at the meeting point of the Lieser and Malta rivers as an important trading center along routes crossing the Alps. To this day, its massive defensive walls remain intact, together with 2 historic town gates and an exceptionally charming old town filled with colorful buildings, cafes, and art galleries. Towering above everything are the picturesque ruins of Burgruin Gmünd, whose origins date back to the 14th century. For centuries, the fortress guarded the important trade routes running through the Lieser Valley and Maltatal Valley, before later being rebuilt in the Renaissance style. Although the castle fell into ruin after a devastating fire in the 19th century, it is now one of the town's greatest attractions. A walk up the steep path leading to the hill rewards visitors with breathtaking views over the entire town of Gmünd and the surrounding Austrian Alps. It is this unique atmosphere that makes a visit to the Porsche Museum only part of the experience. The town itself deserves time to be explored as well. Here, the history of automotive engineering and the history of medieval Austria intertwine in a truly unique way, creating a place that is simply impossible to forget. It is difficult to imagine another place in the world where such an extraordinary collection of historically significant and immensely valuable automobiles has been gathered within such a small space. The Porsche 356 Gmünd, chassis number 020, alone has virtually no equal on the collector's market. It is the 8th oldest surviving Porsche in the world, and, at the same time, one of the most original examples ever to survive. If it were ever to appear at auction, its value could easily reach tens of millions of euros, and according to some experts, even considerably more. The reality, however, is that cars like this are almost never offered for sale. They are priceless witnesses to the birth of the Porsche brand. The same is true for many of the museum's other exhibits. A Porsche 550 Spider can command prices well in excess of 5 million euros. A Porsche Carrera GT is typically valued at around 1.5 to 2 million euros. Racing machines such as the Porsche 935 and the Porsche 962, especially those with documented racing histories and victories, are also worth several million euros each. Added to these are unique prototypes, homologation specials, and the only surviving examples of certain models. The total value of the entire collection is practically impossible to estimate. We are talking about hundreds of millions of euros housed inside one relatively small museum. Yet for the Pfeifhofer family, money has never been the true measure of the collection's worth. Preserving Porsche's history exactly where it all began has always been far more important. There are many outstanding automotive museums around the world. There is the spectacular Porsche Museum in Stuttgart, the enormous collections of Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Ferrari. All of them impress visitors with breathtaking architecture, multimedia displays, and meticulously curated exhibitions. But Gmünd offers something that cannot be designed, manufactured, or purchased for any amount of money: authenticity. Here, you are not looking at a reconstruction of history. You are standing exactly where that history was made. The wooden beams still remember the sound of hammers shaping the very first aluminum body panels. The stone floor remembers the footsteps of Ferdinand Porsche, Ferry Porsche, and Erwin Kommenda. It was from this very building that the first automobiles carrying the Porsche name rolled into the world. Every exhibit seems to tell its own story, and the atmosphere makes you feel as though the craftsmen have only just stepped away from their workbenches and will return at any moment. Even Christoph Pfeifhofer emphasizes that the museum is not meant to be simply a place where people come to look at old cars. It is meant to allow visitors to experience the emotions of the people who, more than 70 years ago, started everything almost from nothing. That is why so many enthusiasts who visit both Stuttgart and Gmünd later admit that it was only here that they truly understood what Porsche was in its earliest days. Even if Porsche is not your favorite automotive brand, Gmünd remains an absolutely extraordinary place. This is not just another car museum. It is the story of people who, after one of the most devastating wars in human history, managed to create something truly beautiful, almost from nothing, using salvaged Volkswagen parts, sheets of aluminum, simple tools, and an enormous amount of passion. They built automobiles that would forever change the course of automotive history. Walking through the old workshop, you begin to understand that great companies are not born inside giant factories. They are born from dreams, courage, and the determination of a handful of people who believe in their own vision. That is why Gmünd inspires not only Porsche enthusiasts, but anyone who loves the history of engineering, design, or motorsport. It is a place that proves even the smallest town can earn its place in world history. And when you leave the museum, stroll through the medieval streets, look up at the castle overlooking the town, and listen to the sound of the Alpine rivers, it is impossible not to feel that time moves just a little more slowly here. This is not only a journey through the history of Porsche, it is also a journey through the history of European automotive engineering. Today, Porsche is synonymous with models such as the 911, 718, Cayenne, Macan, and Panamera. It is associated with victories at Le Mans, state-of-the-art factories, and one of the most recognizable automotive brands in the world. Yet it is easy to forget that this entire story began in the small Austrian town of Gmünd. Inside a former sawmill, surrounded by mountains, and far from the world's great cities, only 52 automobiles were built, cars that gave birth to a legend that continues to this day. Had it not been for the courage of Ferry Porsche, the determination of his team, and the tireless work of the craftsmen who built the first aluminum 356 models, the Porsche we know today might never have existed. That is why Gmünd is far more than another destination on the map of Austria. It is the birthplace of a dream, a place where history meets the present, and where every corner reminds visitors of the beginnings of one of the greatest icons in automotive history. So, if you ever find yourself traveling through Austria, make sure to stop here for at least a few hours. Visit the museum, walk through the streets of the old town, climb to the castle ruins, and be sure to see the very first Porsche workshop. I am convinced that you will leave with a completely new perspective on the history of this remarkable brand. Because it is only when you stand in Gmünd that you truly understand every legend has a birthplace. And the legend of Porsche was born right here.